Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. I'm quite excited actually today to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio because I'm following through on a promise I made to you as well as myself in my October 13th segment of Points of Light Radio, where I featured an organization called the Hammermen of Glasgow. Now, if you recall, that particular segment, I was really only able to touch on the Hammermen because I was only able to bring you a portion of a conversation that I had with our new friend, Robert Cooper. Now, as I said, I told you at the time I wasn't done with the Hammermen, and hopefully today, in today's segment of Points of Light Radio, we can shed a little more light on the Hammermen. Just to briefly recap, the Hammermen of Glasgow can trace its origins back to 1536. The Incorporation of Hammermen of Glasgow sought to regulate the trade of metalworking within the borough of Glasgow and ensure proper standards of training and workmanship, as well as support for their members, widows, and dependents that fell on hard times. They essentially embraced anybody who worked as a metal worker, sword making, clock making, locksmiths, tinsmiths, and others. The Hammermen even fought in battles, including the Battle of Langside in 1568 and Falkirk in 1746. And my guest today is here to shed some more light on that. Her name is Nina Baker. She's the Deacon of the Hammermen of Glasgow. And like I said, I really can't wait to learn a little more about this organization. So let's have Nina Baker shed some more light on the Hammermen of Glasgow. But are you still searching for the light? Are you still hungry for knowledge? Then just trim your lamp and follow me. Nina Baker, welcome to Points.
Hello, pleased to meet you, Stan. And please stop calling me ma'am. It's very, very peculiar in Britain. Unless you're the actual queen or something.
Yeah, I understand. But it's an honor to have you here. I want to begin by saying that.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be asked, of course. One always likes to talk about oneself and one's organization.
Exactly. You're a member of the Incorporation of the Hammermen of Glasgow.
That's correct.
Why don't you tell my listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself?
About me?
Yes.
Or about the craft?
Tell us a little bit about yourself first. What do you do for a living?
Okay. Well, I'm now retired. When I left school, I was a Merchant Navy deck officer.
Oh, okay.
The first female deck cadet to train in Britain. I was with a tanker company and then later with a cargo company. I got my first mate's ticket and left the sea not long after. I took an engineering design degree in my 30s and then did a PhD in concrete durability, as you do. And at that point, I'd started my family and I was living up here in Glasgow. And I've done various things since starting our family, mainly working as a research administrator in the various engineering departments at the 4 universities around Glasgow. I'm completely retired now, but sort of bridging the period when I was still working at the university and my retirement. I spent 10 years as a city councillor representing the city centre ward in Glasgow on behalf of the Scottish Green Party. But I'm retired from everything like that now, and I amuse myself in my retirement mainly with researching and writing and talking about the history of women in engineering, but also with being Deacon of the Incorporation of Hammermen for this year.
Well, yeah, I want you to tell my listeners and viewers about the Incorporation of Hammermen of Glasgow. What exactly do they do? What's the...
Well, I think
they've been around a long time, right?
The first thing to make really clear is that unlike some of the other organisations that you've interviewed, the Incorporation of Hammermen is nothing at all, anything like Freemasonry. It's a completely different... just moving my camera so you can see that I've got my Hammerman t-shirt on.
Yeah.
It's closer in nature to a friendly society or a trade union. And when we were started in the 16th century, in 1563, is when our first charter dates from, although obviously a non-existent organisation doesn't have a charter, so we obviously operated before that, but that's when we got our royal charter. We existed like the guilds, the typical European style of guilds, and the worshipful companies in London to protect the quality of work in our area, in our field, and to control entry to the craft. So we controlled who could sell metalworked goods within the city of Glasgow, who could become an apprentice, what the prices were that you could sell things at. And unlike in London, where they've got different worshipful companies, different liveried companies for each of the metalworking trades, here in Scotland, we have one incorporation per area for all the metalworking trades. So in any given area that had hammermen, and there were incorporations all over Scotland, as with Glasgow, it covered everything from watchmaking, clockmaking, blacksmithing, coppersmithing, goldsmithing, silversmithing, coppersmithing, everything. And we still cover all of that, and jewellery. And nowadays, most of our members who are what we call operative members, that is, members who have some connection with engineering in some form, they're mostly industrial or academic engineers of some kind, including computer engineers, software engineers, even biochemical engineers, genetic engineers. We're very open. We also admit people who have no connection whatsoever with engineering, and that's true of all the 14 trades in Glasgow. It's not true across Scotland, but it's true here that we have been open membership since Victorian times, in that you didn't have to have a professional or personal connection to the occupation that the trade name suggested. Of all the 14 crafts in Glasgow, we probably have the highest proportion of members who are operative, or at least were. A lot of our members, like myself, are retired. So that's kind of how we are. What we do nowadays is we provide a series of prizes to students at the 4 universities around Glasgow, and also to students at the further education colleges, what Americans call trade schools. And there are several of those in and around Glasgow as well. What else can I tell you? So we give Hammerman prizes to each of those colleges and universities, and from it's typically about 24 or so Hammerman prizes. Everybody who wins one of those is invited to apply for our top award, which is the Prince Philip Prize. And the Prince Philip Prize is one for the university sector and one for the further education college sector, the trade school sector. And they apply, they say, if I won this prize, which is a money prize, if I win this prize, I'm going to use this money for, such and such a project. Here are my achievements, here are my ambitions in my future career. And we interview them and we award one of each to the university and the further education sector. And those prizes, the Prince Philip Prizes, named after the late Duke of Edinburgh, the husband of the late Queen, who was himself a Hammerman. Prince Philip joined our Incorporation of Hammermen in 1955. And in fact, when he attended our 60th annual Prince Philip Prize award ceremony, it was his last public engagement before he himself retired in his late 90s. So those prizes are typically given out at our annual dinner, which is going to be in November, which is our main social event of the year. And each of the crafts has a choosing dinner, and this is the same right across Scotland. Everybody has something like this. What happens is that in the middle of September each year, there is choosing day, and on choosing day, all 14 crafts meet in succession, one after the other, in the trades hall to have what amounts to their annual general meeting, known as the choosing day. So choosing day is when the next year's officers are elected. So the deacon, who's in charge of the craft, and the collector, who is like a kind of combination of membership, secretary and treasurer, because he used to go around collecting the membership dues, which were probably paid monthly or maybe quarterly. He'd go round all of the metalworking workshops, and the master hammerman member in each place would have to pay not only for himself, but for his journeyman and a lesser amount for his apprentices. And he would also recruit new apprentices coming into the trade. So the deacon and collector and the next year's collector are all elected at that meeting. And we hear our accounts, the usual thing you get at an AGM. And back in the day, before we had the trades hall, which was built at the very end of the 18th century, designed by Robert Adam, a very famous Scottish architect. Before that, most of the crafts met in various pubs, various inns around Glasgow, and their choosing day would be followed, the meeting would be followed by sort of a little bit of heavy drinking, followed by a pretty solid meal and some more heavy drinking, all on the same day. Now, we don't do it that way anymore, apart from the heavy drinking bit, which is a matter of choice. Now what happens, we all have our choosing day meetings on the one day, and then the dinners are spread out over the year. So there's about half the dinners are before Christmas and the other half are in the spring months. My own dinner will be on the 10th of November. And it's a nerve-wracking business because this is a big formal dinner. Most of the guests will be in black tie evening wear. Probably about a third of them will be in a kilt version of that. But all the most important guests, so if I was a man, I would be wearing white tie and tails. So all the most important guests will be wearing white tie and tails. Very formal indeed. The event itself, it sounds formal, and it's actually very formulaic. We have a kind of script which hardly changes from year to year. And we work our way through various things, various toasts. So I'm looking now at the last of, I'm going to hold this up to the camera, hope that you're members can see. This is the menu from the last dinner we had before COVID, which was in 2019. That's the front of it. And here is the program, what happens. So here you can see this is a list of toasts. So before we eat, there will be grace. And then the toast list. So we toast the monarch, was the Queen, now the King. And we will toast the royal family and His Majesty's Armed Forces. And then the first of the two speakers will speak. So the next set of toasts, the first one is the toast to the Incorporation of Hammermen and the Deacon. And so one of your guest speakers, who can be absolutely anybody, will speak about something. It can be absolutely any topic they choose or that you ask them to talk about. But at the very end, whatever they've spoken about, they say, and so I give you the toast of let's say, and so please be upstanding for the toast to the Incorporation of Hammermen and Deacon. And everybody will stand up and that toast will happen and I will reply. And that is my main speech when I reply to that. And then after that, your second speaker will give a toast to the Trades House of Glasgow, and the deacon convener, who is in charge of all the deacons for all the 14 trades, so he's the boss of bosses here, he will reply to that. And at some point during all of this, it is fixed in advance, but it's presented to the guests in the menu as if it was going to be at some random surprise time. This is the weirdest bit of what we do. We have one of the other crafts visits us, and this is done in rotation, so it isn't the same people each time. And in 2019, it was the Incorporation of Barbers. And what this is the equivalent of an auditor, an external accountant, looking at your books and saying, have you been cheating on the money? This is an external organization examining your money. Because back in the day, everything was cash. Each of the crafts has what's known in Scottish as a locket box. So it's a box with at least 2 locks in it. And the keys are held by 2 people who are not the collector or the deacon. So that there have to be at least 2 people, probably 4 people, to open the box to make sure nobody's stealing, or you'll have to be dishonest to steal from it. So this visitation from another craft is the last remnant of each craft checking the other craft's monetary situations. But anyway, it's done in a very jokey way now. So they sneak out at one point, and then there's at the door.
Yeah. And
our clerk, who wears a small chain of office and black robes, like academic robes or legal robes, he goes and says, well, in the case of the last one we had, the barbers, he said, Deacon, the deacon and collector of the Incorporation of Barbers are without. Shall I admit them? And they're sort of hiding out in the hall. And I will traditionally say, I don't know. Members, shall I admit them? And everybody shouts no, as you can imagine, because this is the formula. So I say, Clark, do they seem clean? Do they seem sober? Do they bring gifts? And he will say something in the affirmative, and I go back to the order and say, well, they're probably okay. Shall we let them in? They say yes. So they come in and they dance in. So our clerk and our collector dance them in, holding little fingers. They skip in to piano music and dance around the edge of the hall till they get to the top table. At which point, I welcome them, and their deacon will give a sort of light-hearted talk about our accounts, and we will exchange gifts, which typically they are themed. So I will be giving gifts on a hammer theme, and they will probably give gifts based on some theme relevant to their craft, but they're not meant to be expensive. They're meant to be quite fun. So, for instance, very, very often, inflated hammers are exchanged. And amongst other gifts I shall be giving are, actually I've got one here. It's a tiny little pin
Okay.
And it's a tiny model of the hammers that suffragettes used to break windows in the early part of the 20th century when they were campaigning for the vote. So it's things on this kind of level. They're very light-hearted. And then the next speech will be the Trades House of Glasgow, responded to by the Deacon convener. And at the very end, I will pop up again and say thank you to everybody, and then we'll sing Auld Lang Syne. Now, I should have mentioned that for the toast to the Incorporation of Hammermen and Deacon, we have our own song, which are printed on the back because nobody will remember the words otherwise.
Okay.
Although we can remember the national anthem. There's a song for the Incorporation of Hammermen and Deacon, which begins under the spreading chestnut tree, the village smithy stands, and so on and so on. Now, traditionally, it's had the most unsingable tune you have ever heard, and it's always an absolute abomination to listen to. So we've had a new tune written this year, which hopefully will be much easier to sing. And then we have a song that goes for the toast to the Trades House. There's another song at the bottom there. It's called The Old Hoose, and that's much easier to sing, and everybody can belt that one out. And then, of course, the end of the evening, we finish up with Auld Lang Syne in the usual way. So that's our main social event. We have a prize-winning day, a prize awards evening, and every few years, we'll have a new members' evening. During lockdown, we started having Zoom talks, and we're continuing with those.
What are you talking about, Zoom talks?
Sorry?
What would you be talking about during these Zoom talks?
Well, they've been on a very wide variety. The first few were sort of historical about, so I gave a talk about women in the Hammermen.
Okay.
Somebody, which is on Zoom. You can find it on Zoom. Somebody else gave a more general talk about the history of our incorporation, but most of the other talks have been about what people are working on. One of our members, who will be Deacon in a few years' time, he gave a talk about the space industry in Scotland, for instance.
Okay.
So they will be not too academic, but people will talk about their work in some variety of engineering.
Well, you say that you're a deacon. Now, what are the other offices within the Hammermen?
Right. Well, when you join the Master Court, which is the sort of the managing committee, the newest two members are known as Big Key and Little Key. Okay. And this goes back to the box again.
Okay.
So our wooden box, which has two locks in it, for which a big key and a little, and these are fancy keys, like for a castle door or something. They're big, they're like that.
Okay.
So, but that doesn't carry with it any, role at all. It's purely formulaic now. Then a few years, you have to have been on the Master Court for a minimum of 5 years before you can be deacon. And typically, after you've been on the Master Court for a couple of years, you'll become prizes and awards convener. And that means you organise notifying all the colleges and universities that the prize scheme is running, and how to apply and all the rest, and then dealing with all the applications and so on, and organising the awards evening. Then you'll typically have a year off. You'll still be on the Master Court attending the meetings to manage the craft. And then you'll become collector, which, as I explained, is a cross between a treasurer and a membership secretary. And then you'll be late collector. So when you've done a job, the immediate year afterwards, you're the late whatever it is. You're not dead, but you're the late collector. And in that year, you're organising your deacon's dinner, because the year after that, you're deacon. So you go collector, late collector, deacon. And the year after you're a deacon, you're the late deacon. So those are the, and you remain on the Master Court for another 3 years after you've stop being deacon, and then you automatically rotate off. So there's a constantly circulating And typically people are on the master court for about 8 or 9 years all told.
Well, now you mentioned something. You don't meet in lodges, do you? You meet in what, guild halls, you said, or?
We meet in a place called the Trades Hall of Glasgow, which is a beautiful, beautiful building. You can look it up on the internet. It's an absolute. If you come to Glasgow, I really recommend you get in touch with me, and I'll arrange a tour for you.
Okay.
It's an amazing building. It was built for us, and apart from Glasgow Cathedral, it's the oldest building in Glasgow still in its original use.
How many chapters, though, are there of the Hammermen?
Sorry?
You're in the Hammermen of Glasgow.
Yeah.
Are there different chapters of the Hammermen around Scotland, you said?
There are. There are a number of, each completely freestanding. They're not part of an overarching organisation.
Yeah, you don't have a Grand Lodge.
No, there's nothing like that. So each of them is completely independent. They're independent charities. So we are a freestanding charity. In Britain, you have to be registered with the government charity organisation, and you have a number, charity number. So each of the Hammermen incorporations around the country is each freestanding, has no responsibility to anybody else. I am now in touch with them all. One of the things I did in my year when I was collector was I did some research to find out where there had ever been Hammermen. I can send you this if you're interested. And there were Hammermen, incorporations of Hammermen in most of the sort of major cities and smaller towns across Scotland back in the day.
What about the rest of the UK?
Sorry?
What about the rest of the UK?
Well, it's completely different there. Can I come back to that? Okay, so in Scotland now, still, we have Glasgow, which is the biggest. We have Edinburgh, Stirling, Kirkcudbright, Aberdeen, Dundee, Irvine, Paisley, and Selkirk. I think that's it. And they all operate in different ways. They're all much smaller than us, okay. But they all operate in quite different manners. Of all of those, I know that Dundee is still a closed craft in that you can only join it if you have some connection with engineering. And the only one that still operates in the real old way is Selkirk, which is one of the small towns down in the borders of Scotland, and the border towns in Scotland are very traditional anyway. But the Selkirk Hammermen are the last remaining group which only admit new members who are apprentices of an appropriate occupation. Okay. And nobody else still does it that way, but they do.
Are they all mixed, or do some of them only admit men and some women?
All of them will admit women now, but the Selkirk ones, because they have this restriction. Now, I haven't spoken to them this year, but when I spoke to them a couple of years ago, they said, we will admit women, no problem at all. The main problem is that the woman has to be an apprentice in appropriate occupation. Oh. We think one of our members' daughters may be following her dad into the garage business, in which case she will probably join. But I haven't checked that up to find out if she has. But otherwise, yes, they've been mixed to quite enough. But the whole business about how women came to be admitted to the Glasgow incorporations is a rather fraught story, and that is the basis of the YouTube video that I gave. It was a sort of a run through the battle, and so it was one of these things that went up and down in the 20th century when it became, the coming of universal suffrage, women's vote, and all this kind of thing. There was a sort of move in the 1920s. Women were still not admitted to any of the crafts at that point. But some of them were made what are known as Burgess sisters, which is a sort of halfway thing, in that everybody who is a member of one of the Glasgow incorporations also has to be a Burgess of the city. And this is the equivalent of being a free citizen. And so up on my wall, I have 2 certificates, one admitting me to the Hammermen and one confirming that I'm now a Burgess Sister of Glasgow. So Burgess Sisters were admitted, but none of them were admitted as full members of the crafts until the 2000s. The battle went backwards and forwards. Sometimes the Hammermen were on the yes side, sometimes we were on the no side. Some of these meetings practically ended in stand-up fights. Everybody got so uptight about it. But in the end, because the decision was that no craft would do it on their own, they were waiting for all 14 crafts in Glasgow to agree that they would all be willing to admit women. And so the first woman we admitted to the Hammermen was Prince Philip's daughter, Princess Anne. So she is now our last remaining royal member. And I must say, I've met her not in connection with Hammerman duties, but I have met her, and she's far and away my favourite royal because she's a very down-to-earth person, a very practical person, and extremely knowledgeable on all sorts. So she only takes on things that she's going to make it her business to be properly involved with. So to the best of my knowledge, other than the Selkirks, who are waiting on an apprentice, as far as I know, all the other incorporations of Hammermen across Scotland all now admit women.
Yeah, so, but being a friendly society, do you have a degree system in the Hammermen, or?
No, there's nothing like that. So, again, we're very much not like the Freemasons in that respect. The only way I say it's a friendly society, it's only in the sense of we exist to support our members. And nowadays that is mainly through the giving of prizes to students, and also to a much lesser degree in, we have some funds to help members who've fallen on hard times. And the Trades House itself has funds for that purpose. But with the coming of the British welfare state, after the Second World War, the need for money for people who were really in difficulties is much less than it ever was. I think the Hammermen now only have 2 pensioners. When I say pensioners, we give them some small number of hundreds of pounds a year. We're not paying anything that would support anybody. People can apply to us for sort of one-off grants. So sometimes a member who has fallen on hard times will need, let's say, a new gas boiler or something, and we might chip in for that. So the friendly, when I use the term friendly society, it's not in the sense of Freemasonry. It's in the sense of an organisation that will help its own members if they're in hard times, but to a much lesser extent than it ever used to be. We give grants to other organisations. So in recent years, we've supported something called Formula Student. Now, Formula Student is a UK-wide programme for university engineering students, where they set up groups in each university. These are completely freestanding groups that organise themselves, all students, no staff, and they design and build a racing car from scratch each year. Oh. And we support the one at the University of Glasgow, which I'm thrilled to say won the Formula Student prize this year. They beat all the other universities in the whole of Britain, and they're far less well-resourced than many others. They operate out of a workshop not much bigger than a cupboard. And they did, so we're very proud to have been supporters. We give them a grant each year. We also give a grant to something called FemEng, which is an organisation for women engineering students at Glasgow. And they do an annual programme where they twin with women engineering students. It was Rwanda, then Malawi, I think now Kenya, and they go out and they work with women engineering students in that country to deliver outreach workshops in schools around the country. And people can apply to us. So, for instance, your local sort of engineering-ish charities can apply to us for small grant, a few £100 for something or other, that kind of thing.
Well, what has the Hammermen done for you personally? What would you say? Like, why do you like being in the Hammermen so much?
Well, I resisted joining for a while, actually, because I thought, well, I don't really know anybody, and, it'll feel a bit odd. And then I realized I actually knew quite a few people in it. And I think most people join to support the work that it does, to give back into society. To say, well, I've had a good life. I've been fortunate. Can I work with the Hammermen to encourage the younger generation of engineers coming on? And also for fellowship, just for the social, meeting people. It's not particularly a networking organisation, not like let's say the Rotary or something.
Yeah.
But one of the things I would like to do, and I think some of the people who will be Deacon in coming years, we would like to expand the number of occasions when our members have the opportunity to meet in person. But it's a way of supporting an occupation that's been good to me, to encourage people either who say fallen on hard times or the next generation of engineers.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Nia. It's been wonderful, and it's been wonderful hearing about this great work. This is a very exciting organization. I appreciate you.
I'm not going to let you go because I want to show you my Deacon's chain, which very unusually is at home with me, because we've got a church service tomorrow, and we were told to take our chains today so that the hallkeeper didn't have to open up the safe first thing tomorrow morning.
Okay.
I've got the chain here to show you.
Oh, wow.
Right, so I don't know how gracefully I can put this on. Famous for getting it tangled. So just to show you, this is the back. I'll move further away. This is the back.
Okay.
And this is the front.
Okay. Wow, I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. I'd have to get someone to help me with that. I can tell you that right now.
Yep. Okay, here we go. Right, so there's a medal.
Okay.
And that is the coat of arms of Glasgow, with so the coat of arms of Glasgow at the top, and our hammer with the crown on top, and our motto around, well, it says the Incorporation of Hammermen of Glasgow, and on the back it's got a list of the names of the people who were on the Master Court when this was made. Our motto, which you can't see, it's on my T-shirt, it's around the edge of the thing, is by hammer in hand, all arts do stand, because you basically, there's nothing you can think of where you haven't got to have a tool of some sort to start with, and the beginning of the making of any tool is a hammer, even if it's only a rock. But the reason this is so enormous is that each deacon pays for a link of their own design.
Oh, okay. So
mine isn't on it yet. My sister-in-law is in fact a jeweler, and she's making mine, and it will be on in a couple of weeks. But I'll show you. These are some of the newest ones paid for by recent deacons, and the idea is the design is something relating to either your work or your personal interest. So somewhere around the back, one of them is a rose, because the guy liked growing roses. But most of these things are engineering things. Oh gosh,
Wow.
that's got a bit of a fankle, you know. So we've got a helicopter, we've got an ingot, got a racing car, we've got the box that sand is put in to make metal castings. We've got a shovel, we've got a roll of cable, got a little lifeboat. Oh gosh, I'm trying to see all these different. So the idea is everybody has something of their own choice. We've got several ships, being a port city, which was big on shipbuilding. Quite a lot of ship things. There's a propeller somewhere. Here we've got an actual hammer. So this is what I get to wear every time I go anywhere as deacon. And I was wearing it last night. I was at one of the other crafts choosing dinners. So I was wearing this, and everybody, all the deacons and there are some other organizations within the Trades House. So the Trades House is the organization, the Trades Hall is the building. Within the Trades House, there is also a Freemasonry Lodge, and the Association of Grand Antiquities, which is members of any of the crafts who are at least third generation in one of the crafts. So that's not me. But, you know, if one of my children had children, they could be grand antiquities. So everybody who wears a chain, we're known as the chain gang for the year. And so there's a lot of bling going about at these dinners. And it's slightly scary, actually. I took a taxi home last night because I wasn't going on public transport with this thing. Oh. So I couldn't let you go without seeing the chain.
Well, I appreciate that you did, and all the best to you and the Hammermen. Well, Nina Baker, brothers and sisters, wasn't that great, reconnecting again with that organization and getting that much more light on it, right? It's quite interesting, actually. And I learned a lot from that. I will say that. I'm sure you did. One thing as I'm going through this journey with you, I'm seeing that people from all walks of life join these different fraternal organizations. And they like I said, they bring a lot of fresh thinking and new ideas to them, but there's also something for everybody when it comes to fraternalism. There really is, right? I mean, you can tell she really enjoys being part of the Hammermen of Glasgow. And I can keep saying, if you know any more of these little known organizations, let me know and I'll reach out to them. But I'm afraid that's really all I have time for today. But before I go, I want to remind you that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I also welcome your comments and input. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, it's been a pleasure fellowshipping with you today. And until we meet again, just step